Hello, my name is James McDevitt, and I'm doing a presentation for Ray Aldritt's class on Christology. The book that I've chosen to do is Catherine Tanner's book, Christ is the Key, and I'll be covering the first two parts. Chapter 1, which is about the image of God, and Chapter 2, which is the first chapter on grace. Now, the book starts off asking a very interesting question. What is the image of God? Were we created with this image? And if not, what does that mean? What is it? Tanner says very sincerely that the image of God is actually the relationship with God. Now, I thought this was a very interesting definition of the image of God. When I first heard the word covenant, I thought, like most people did, that it meant the law. It's quite interesting that in actuality, covenant is that relationship. There were certain ways that God showed his relationship to the people. And it was through law, through wisdom, through the divine giving of his word. But what was interesting is that if the image of God is a relationship, a lot of people these days don't have that relationship. They do not call upon God. They do not pray to God. There's a lot of atheists in this world. So, in sense, that means that somehow the image of God has been lost. We don't all seem to possess it anymore. And the reason through this loss of the relationship is through sin. It's through our own choices to sin and our own choices to break off the relationship. So, at the moment of creation, Tanner does make a point that we were created, Adam and Eve, with a relationship with God in mind. So, the relationship, I just have to make this point that Tanner made, is with all three people, or all three persons, actually, of the Trinity. It's not just with the Father, it's not just with the Son, and it's not just with the Holy Spirit. All have to be thought of as one, combined, in relationship with each other. And we can enter in with a relationship with them. And it's kind of interesting that throughout our lives, we learn about relationships. When we're born, we have a relationship with our mother, with our father, with our family, and throughout our lives, we learn to be in relationship with each other. It made sense to me that if the Creator created us, he would also create us with a plan to have a relationship with us. And that is done through the second person of the Trinity. When God and Jesus Christ incarnated, he incarnated with that relationship. And it's quite interesting that Tanner made a point that only in Jesus is the divine image at its completeness. And that's because that, Jesus, he wants to worship and he wants to serve the Father at all times. There wasn't really any moment that he didn't want to have a relationship with the Father, and he never sinned. So there was never a breaking away or a broken relationship. And in a sense, we could never really, as human beings, have this relationship on our own without divine help. And she made mention of the differences between creatures and humanity. And she mentioned that creatures do have within themselves some parts of God's divine image suitable to their own characteristics within their own species. Humans were created with rationality and intellect, kind of like how the angels were created with these same properties. Therefore, both humans and angels want to have this relationship with the Creator, and if it's not fulfilled, humans want to fill that gap their own way by pleasing themselves. And it could be in the form of food or drink, entertainment, any type of pleasure to kind of fill that emptiness. But at the same time, it never really gets filled, because it's not really, people don't really want pleasures and entertainment. They really want that relationship. So that's a very interesting point that's made. Now, the relationship comes to us through the divine word and the Spirit, the word of wisdom. We had that at creation, but again, with sin entering into the created world, humanity lost that. And we can reclaim that through our own action of wanting it. In a sense, it's not really our action. Tanner made a point with this too, that if we think that it's our own action of wanting through faith, then we kind of put Christ's action or God's action as second. And in actuality, it's not by anything that we've done at all. It's all God's part in wanting to have that relationship back. And we have to take that into consideration here. Okay? We become good and wise by choice. And another thing that makes us different from animals and created world is that our human nature doesn't really change. We don't become superhuman or something that's not human. We're still human, but there is a improvement. And even though Christ might come into our lives and we have a relationship with God, it's still possible to sin. However, there is good, God works with our sin and works with our nature to improve our lives and to improve ourselves, and we can become closer and closer to the true image of who God is. So that's very important things to remember there. And I love one of the quotes that Tanner wrote in her book. And she said that whatever, therefore, we choose through our love, that which we also become. And that's on page 46. And I just thought that was a really good way to end in the first chapter there. Grace comes to us, and it is necessary to complete our nature. So in a way, Tanner believes that we are incomplete the way that we have created without the grace and help from God to propel us into the relationship with Him. And it's kind of interesting, I really struggled a lot with these chapters, thinking that, sometimes it sounds like there's a flaw in creation. in a sense, like we were created not, you know, with grace or not with these types of things. But at the same time, I think really what she's trying to get at is that we were created already having a relationship with God, and yet through sin we chose to break it off. And even though we do not have the image of God right now, for a lot of people, they don't believe, they're atheists, they still have something within them, the human rationality, the intellect, and the free will choice, and even the drive to come back to God and reestablish a relationship with Him. And that's important thing to remember. It's also kind of interesting that in one sense she says that Christ is the image of God in a way that human beings cannot possibly become. Yet at the same time, she uses Christological language of the resurrection or rebirth, and she applies those terms to us, describing us in similar ways to who Christ is. And in actuality, in the future, we will be resurrected as Christ is resurrected. And I think, Christologically, that's important. We shouldn't just think of Christ as God in a sense that being above us and we can never be like Him. I think He did incarnate not only to save humanity, but to show an example of what humanity has the potential to be. I think we do have the potential to not sin. We don't sin all the time. I mean, we do some great and amazing things, and we can have a relationship for sure. So the question is then, what is sin? And on page 69, she says that sin means that we have chosen an environment for ourselves that is not suitable for our nature. It means that we seek nourishment that is not good for us. And I think this is very, very interesting. So to not sin means to come into the full meaning of our nature, to be who we really are. And she mentions the two words sanctification and justification. She gave meanings of these on pages 99 and 100. And she says that justification is a manner of incarnation and the divine powers possessed by the humanity of Christ in virtue of what humanity with the Word. And sanctification she mentions as referring to what happens to the humanity of Christ on that basis over the course of His life and death. I thought these definitions were quite interesting because they're all centered on Christ and not on ourselves. I used to think that justification and sanctification referred to the changing process within ourselves. And it was very interesting to see that she takes the image of God in relationship and puts it completely on God. And I just wanted to close this presentation by looking at a quote that she says, by looking to Christ, we come to know that our salvation is sure. And that really is the image. The image of God is to know our salvation is sure. Thank you.